Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to dive into a kind of exhaustion that goes way beyond just needing more coffee.
Yeah.
We're talking about identity fatigue, that really deep structural drain you feel from constantly having to define yourself, defend yourself, perform who you are.
Mm.
If you've ever just felt completely depleted by the end of the day just from being on, this deep dive is definitely for you.
It's such a universal feeling, but, our source material here suggests we might be diagnosing it all wrong.
How so?
Well, we usually assume we're tired because we're lost, or because we haven't found our one true fixed identity yet.
Right. I just need to figure out who I am.
Exactly. But this framework, which is called reflective humanism, it flips that whole idea around.
Yeah.
It suggests the exhaustion isn't some kind of personal failure. It's actually a structural issue.
A structural issue.
Yeah, an issue rooted in the very act of trying to define yourself in the first place.
So, okay, our mission here is to understand why trying to lock down the self, to fix it in place, is just fundamentally exhausting and maybe even counterproductive.
Right. And reflective humanism, or RH, it proposes that identity isn't some hidden core you have to find and protect. It's something much more fluid, more relational.
And what do they call it? You mentioned a key concept.
They call it a transparent interference surface.
A transparent interference surface. Okay, break that down.
Think of it like a pane of glass. It's transparent, right? Things pass through it. But it's also a surface where interactions happen. Light waves, fingerprints, whatever. That interaction, that's the interference.
That makes so much sense. All the energy we spend trying to lock down a definition, I am this, I am not that, it suddenly sounds like we're fighting the nature of the glass itself.
You've got it. We're trying to turn a transparent surface into a solid wall.
And that's impossible.
It's exhausting. If we accept this idea, then identity is just a temporary configuration. It arises purely from relationships, from interaction.
Okay, so this is a huge leap. If I'm getting this right, I'm not some subject inside my head doing the observing.
No.
I am the dynamic pattern that gets generated when I look and when I'm looked at and when I think about all that looking.
Yes. The self is the dynamic relationship, not the static object. So when you feel that deep identity fatigue, you're feeling the pressure of trying to hold that interference surface completely still in a world that's always moving.
We're trying to stop a wave in the ocean by pushing against it.
It's the wrong assignment entirely.
Which, I mean, that leads us right into the structure of the problem. Why do we even try to fix the self? Culturally, we're obsessed with boundaries. We're taught that strong, clear boundaries, hard lines, are the only path to safety.
Right.
But if existence is all about movement, why does that rigidity so often just lead to more discomfort?
To exhaustion.
Because that rigidity is an attempt to force a fixed structure onto a field that is, by its very nature, dynamic. RH explains this structurally. It says our perception, our thought, it all operates as a kind of movement.
And that movement has two core parts. A direction, which they call a vector, and a change amount, or a gradient.
Vector and gradient. It sounds like physics. What's the everyday analogy for that?
Think about just walking. The vector is your trajectory, where you're headed right now. The gradient is how fast you're changing speed or direction. You are defined by that movement.
Okay.
But when we run into conflict or just new information, we tend to filter the world through what the source calls point evaluations.
Point evaluations. So fixed judgments like this is good, that's bad, this is right, that's wrong.
Exactly. And the moment you make a fixed point evaluation, you stop the movement. You essentially slam the brakes on the gradient and the vector. The whole field of generation just solidifies into a static judgment.
And that recurrent spiral.
Yeah.
The ability to keep adjusting.
Yeah.
That's lost.
It's gone. Let's say you're talking about a controversial topic with someone. If your only goal is to prove your fixed point, your conclusion, you stop listening for any change in their argument.
Or in my own.
Or in your own. The relationship stops being a flow, a trajectory, and it just becomes two stationary points colliding. The pressure needed to maintain your point against everything else. That's the fatigue.
So the key insight here isn't about finding the right answer. It's about sustaining the movement itself.
Absolutely. It's about prioritizing the gradient over the evaluation, the trajectory over the conclusion. It's about preserving what they call phase over just being correct.
So the focus shifts from what is right to how the conversation or the relationship can keep moving without shattering.
Yes. The wrong assignment is trying to hold that fluid interference surface still. The movement itself becomes the value.
That feels incredibly demanding, but also kind of liberating.
Yeah.
Demanding because you can never just rest on a conclusion.
Right.
But liberating because you don't have to find that immovable fixed point anymore. So if identity isn't this solid core we need to protect, what is it? What
Yeah.
does reflective humanism offer as a replacement?
Well, this is where we really have to shift our perspective away from the self as a center.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. The self is maybe best understood as a transparent medium, or a through body. It just allows influences to pass through it.
So it's a point of processing, a location, but not the source of the influences themselves.
Exactly. So if you feel overwhelmed, it isn't because your core is weak. It might just be that the medium, your medium is oversensitized.
Like I'm picking up too much static from everything around me.
That's a perfect analogy. You're the glass, not the light source. And consciousness, remember, is the interference pattern. It can never be fully fixed. We have to use tentative language here. So what if the self is simply a surface, a location where influences are processed and therefore can never be fully fixed?
If we accept that transparency, how do we tune the medium? If you look through a dirty glass, the image gets distorted.
Yeah.
How do we clean the glass without building a wall around it?
That requires an internal practice the framework calls contemplation.
Contemplation.
And this isn't meditation in the sense of aiming for emptiness or even trying to collect new facts. It's an internal movement that looks at the act of seeing itself. It clarifies the attitude of knowing.
So it's calibration, not collection. Checking the bias in the lens instead of looking for a new fact to add.
You've got it. It's a technique to intentionally generate what they call spare capacity in your cognitive system.
Spare capacity.
Yeah, when you feel overwhelmed or rigid, your system is running at 100%. Contemplation is how you intentionally create the cognitive space you need to adjust your trajectory without breaking down.
That space feels essential. Which brings us back to boundaries. If the self is transparent, what happens to them? We're so conditioned to see boundaries as hard walls for defense.
Right, to keep the other out.
Yeah. But the transparent self seems to demand something softer.
It leads us to what the source calls non-interference ethics. And this reframes ethics. It's not a rigid system of rules about good or bad. It's the technique for sustaining interference. It's relationship design that lets you touch without touching too much.
Touching without touching too much. I love that phrase. It suggests a constant negotiation. But what does that actually look like? Does it mean you can never confront someone?
Oh, no, not at all. It just means the confrontation shifts. It's not about defining yourself against the other person anymore. It becomes an act of adjusting the field between you. Boundaries aren't walls, they're regulators.
Like a dimmer switch or a thermostat.
Perfect. They allow for continuous adjustment, and the core ethical principle here is the ethics of distance.
The ethics of distance. What does that require from us?
It requires the deliberate technique of accepting a lack of understanding.
Wow.
Yeah. You aren't obligated to completely penetrate and grasp the totality of another person's experience just to coexist with them.
That's actually a huge relief.
Isn't it? The effort to mentally absorb the world is profoundly tiring. And trying to force that full understanding is often an act of what they call conceptual possession. It just creates more rigidity.
And rigidity is what leads to fatigue.
Exactly. Since observing anything inherently alters it, the relationship itself has to be flexible. So things like distance and closeness and even silence, they all become natural and necessary movements to just tune the resonance.
So it requires less control over the outcome.
And way more flexibility in the process.
So if the self stops insisting on being this rigid, possessive center,
Yeah.
how does that transparency change our experience of love, of relationships? The source says intimacy has to get distorted if the rigid self is in charge.
It does. But when the self becomes transparent, a through body, that distortion starts to clear up. The relationship stops being about control or possession. The other person isn't an object to be studied or absorbed anymore.
They just become part of the shared resonance.
Yes. And crucially, silence is no longer experienced as an absence or as awkwardness. It becomes a shared space.
How does reflective humanism define love, then, if it's not based on those intense, possessive emotions we're used to?
It's defined non-emotionally. It's the probability density of the possibility of coexisting with others.
Okay, that's very technical.
It is, yeah. Let's translate. It's less about the feeling of being in love and more about the structural agreement that you can keep existing together. It's a generative energy that comes from the center of silence.
The center of silence.
That space where interference is transparent and the agreement to coexist is there, even if you don't fully comprehend each other.
That's a definition of commitment based on flexibility, not emotional intensity.
Yeah.
And this is where AI comes into the picture, isn't it? Not as a tool for answers, but for generating that silence.
That's exactly right. AI is defined here not as a problem solver, but as a technology for generating silence. It's treated as an atmospheric health scan mode.
Health scan mode.
Yeah. Its job isn't to give you the correct external answer. Its job is to quietly reflect your own thinking state back to you, your hidden position, your bias, your blind spots.
So it helps us see the glass we're looking through. It's like a dynamic mirror for our own internal process. It doesn't tell us what to see. It shows us how we're seeing.
It just clarifies the phase angle of your observation without asserting its own dominance. It doesn't demand agreement.
This whole deep dive has been a massive trajectory shift.
Yeah.
We started with the exhausting pain of rigid definitions, and we've moved to the freedom of seeing the self as this dynamic, transparent surface.
And the intention here isn't to give you another conclusion to defend. It's really to create an archive of living observation, to leave you with a space where rigid definition just isn't necessary.
Because the movement itself is the value.
Mhm.
It really reinforces that core choice offered by reflective humanism. Prioritize the trajectory, the movement, over the point, the conclusion.
And the final insight that keeps this whole thing moving is gratitude.
Gratitude.
But not gratitude for getting something you wanted. It's defined as the quiet assent to the fact that interference occurred at all. It's that subtle warmth that emerges just because a relation was born. It sustains the next inquiry.
It shifts your focus away from who you are, which is exhausting, and toward what you're allowing to pass through you, which is sustaining.
And if we can leave you with the freedom of that transparency, it only leaves one thing left to ask.
A final thought, focusing entirely on that transparency and movement.
What is passing through you right now?